Welcome back to another video for the AP Psychology course. This is lesson number 8 on the organization of the nervous system. This video is basically going to break down the nervous system. You can see here in the picture how it is diagrammed out. This video is actually going to focus on the PNS, also known as the peripheral nervous system. And then the next video will focus on the CNS, which is the central nervous system. So the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, is basically all of the nerve fibers in your body that lie outside of the brain or the spinal cord. So you can take a look at this diagram here. It pretty much shows you exactly what we're talking about. And nerves, simply all they are is just a collection of axons bundled together, and they're routed all throughout your body down to the periphery, like your hands and your feet, etc. Even though there's not really anything else. You don't have like a tail or anything. The peripheral nervous system is actually divided into two parts. These are known as the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Now, the somatic nervous system deals more with voluntary-based function, whereas the autonomic nervous system is going to deal with involuntary-based function. Now, within the somatic nervous system, there is a confusing pair in AP Psychology, and this is known as afferent nerve fibers and efferent nerve fibers. Now, these can be very easily confused, and if you have watched my Confusing Pairs edition video, you will actually see this one there. But afferent nerve fibers are going to transmit information from your body to the CNS. This is also your brain. So your body experiences something, it's quickly going to route that information to your brain, whereas efferent nerve fibers are going to transmit information from your brain to your body. And so let's say that you are cooking dinner and you grab a bowl that is cooking some hot food, and the end of that bowl actually is really hot. And so what's going to happen is information is going to pass along your afferent nerve fibers, that's afferent with an A, and that's going to pass from your hand basically to your brain. And your brain is then going to realize, okay, that's kind of hot. Let me go ahead and tell the body to remove the hand. And so the brain is going to send a signal back via the efferent nerve fibers, this time with an E, and it's going to tell your body to basically let go of grasping this hot pot. Now, this is obviously going to all happen very quickly because you don't really think about information traveling different nerve fibers to figure out what you need to do or to react to something. But so it does happen on a really fast scale, but ultimately this is what's going to happen when your body and brain are communicating messages. Now, moving on to the autonomic nervous system, this is going to be for more involuntary based function. So these nerves are going to connect to some organs like the heart, blood vessels, smooth muscles, and glands, and it controls a lot more involuntary based things such as digestion and heart rate, perspiration, pupil dilation. The autonomic nervous system is actually going to be divided into two parts, and so these parts are known as the parasympathetic division and the sympathetic division. Now, at this time, basically, this is where the fight or flight response is going to come in, which some people have heard before. And so one of these divisions is going to be responsible for controlling the fight or flight response, whereas the other division is basically the opposite. It's going to keep your body calm, it's going to try to store energy and conserve your resources. So that part that's doing that is the parasympathetic division, and then the part that is going to handle the fight or flight response is going to be the sympathetic division. Now, you can take a look at this chart here and basically look at all the opposite effects of whether the parasympathetic division is kicking in or if it's the sympathetic. I'm not going to go over them, but the fight or flight response is basically when you're trying to decide in an emergency scenario or even in a non-emergency scenario, because the brain doesn't always dictate the difference. In this case, do you stay and fight the event, the aggression, or do you flee? So do you fight or flight? You fight it, or you flee it, or you flight it. Even though flight it doesn't really make sense, it's flee, but it is what it is. Then the central nervous system, like I said, which we're going to go into more depth in the next video, is basically just the brain and spinal cord. And so two vocabulated words here that go along with this are the meninges and the cerebrospinal fluid. And so the meninges are to protect your spinal cord, whereas the cerebrospinal fluid actually nourishes your brain. And it's also what helps the brain stay in a constant state of flotation. If you didn't have cerebrospinal fluid, then your brain would be more likely to probably slosh around and go up against the sides and cause basically brain swelling and maybe hemorrhaging, and so this one would be good. Also, part of the nervous system and the brain information here, we have some research methods that are used to try to find new information about the brain. And so there's a lot of different techniques. I'd say the biggest one is probably going to be the EEG, or the electroencephalograph. And this is basically a series of wires that's going to be hooked up to your brain via some type of cap or some device that can connect all the wires. And this is going to actually monitor the electrical activity in your brain. And so it will transmit this in the form of brain waves. And so when we get to the unit on consciousness and sleep, we'll be looking at this a little bit more. But that's probably one of the bigger brain scans. We've also got ESB, which is the electrical stimulation of the brain. And so this is used here. You see this picture of the woman on the right. She has this little device on. And basically what it's going to try to do is mimic, well, it's going to stimulate brainwave activity through electrodes. We have lesioning, which is more often used on animals. And this is trying to look at the effects of brain destruction and then regeneration. And so they'll actually use they'll drill a tiny hole in the side of the brain, or the exterior of the skull, and they will use a very thin, small cattle prod-like device, which is known as a stereotaxic instrument. And they'll use this to basically insert an electrode and burn some tissue, and then they want to look at the regeneration effects. And then the last one we have TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and this is going to basically allow lesioning to be done on humans through the route of magnetic coils. And actually this procedure has been found to help people in dealing with things like depression, so it is a possibility. And then for brain imaging techniques, we have 4 scans. Some of you may have experienced some of these scans before if you've ever been at risk for having a concussion, or to see if you had a concussion. The most common and cheapest of the scans is the CT scan, and so most people will have these done. It will present your brain through a series of slices. So it's going to show the structure of the brain through a series of slices. Like I said, this is the cheapest and most common. The upgraded version of this is the MRI, and that is the magnetic resonance imaging scan. And this is very similar to a CT scan. The only difference is that it's actually going to be able to show structure in a 3D perspective as opposed to just brain slices. 2 other scans that are worth noting are the PET scan, and this is positive emission tomography scan, and this one is going to actually map brain function, and one of the things that it can also show is glucose consumption, so that's a good note. And then you have the upgraded MRI, which is known as the fMRI, the functional MRI, and the difference between this one and the CT scan is that it basically just goes one step further, and it actually can look at oxygen consumption in the brain as well as blood flow to the brain. And so the fMRI is not as available as some of the other ones. It's obviously going to be a lot more upgraded and a lot more expensive as a result of that. So more often than not, people will generally get CT scans and MRI scans, and then based on those findings, they may be recommended to look at getting a PET scan or look at getting an fMRI. So that's pretty much going to be it for this introduction on the nervous system and how it is divided up. Hope to see you on the next video, where we will continue with the central nervous system and explore all of the fun parts of the brain.